It is exciting. We're back in AMC land here. I am Wes Carroll, your host. Michael Schwartz is with me, as is Pete Baum. Their expertise knows nearly no bounds. But Pete, before we hit the record button, you said you wanted to say some things. So why don't you jump straight in to recap something from last time that you wanted to pick up the thread on?
Sure. So the last problem we did was fundamentally a visual problem. There was a circle and you were taking some piece out of it and trying to find the area and what have you. And as if you are a regular watcher of this know, visual things are not my primary skills. And so what I did, which many of my students do, which is a bad piece of test taking, is I immediately said, this is a visual problem. This doesn't play to my strengths. Oh, crap, I'm screwed. And that's a very bad place to start from. And
the panic response.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've always looked for, when I'm talking to my students, a slightly milder word for panic. I don't know if either of you can, because panic is too strong, but it's certainly, you got the right flavor, just the degree. Panic is a little strong on the degree, but exactly the right feeling.
Yeah, all right.
And what I teach my students to do, and what I should have done myself, and it is always humbling to realize that, I make many, all, whatever of the mistakes my students make if you put me in the right context, is what I should have said to myself at that moment is, oh, this is a visual problem, which does not play to my strengths. First thing is, if this is a really hard visual problem, I'm not getting it. Because if you can get the hardest questions on your weakest subject areas right, that means you're getting a perfect score. I mean, kind of definitionally. If you can get all the questions right, even on the things you're worst at. So the first thing I should have done is said, okay, this is, and of course, AMC, you get some idea of level of difficulty, and which in this case was verbally provided by the two of you. This wasn't so hard. Like, this is not a super hard visual problem. And the correct response is, let me try something simplistic using the simplistic abilities or tools that I have available to me. And if that can get it, great. And if not, then I'm probably not getting that one, as opposed to, and then then the result is you can get all the problems right, let's say, on your strongest subjects, and then, cover the easy and maybe the medium stuff on the subjects you're not so good at, and you're going to be in a great place at that point, as opposed to, oh, crap, this is not, because I'll have students and they'll say, I suck at percents or whatever, or number theory, whatever the thing is, and they just become incapable of doing anything, even questions that actually, even with whatever their limitations are, they are still totally capable of doing.
That makes perfect sense to me. Okay, I like this a lot, and it actually plays right into the subject I was hoping to strong-arm us into, but I don't need to do any strong-arming because you've already segued it so nicely, which is, given that we've done some of this stuff, what have you learned about how you should be taking this test differently? The reason I'm asking this question is that the way people are going to discover this conversation among us and the way that they're going to get value out of it in the first 90 seconds is they're AMC students. They're interested in getting better. Their parents are AMC students. They're interested in getting better at this thing, right? And the question is, okay, well, what should I do first? And the three of us all know that, not to be a smart aleck about it, but the first thing you should do is address the biggest problem you have. And, we work in this field. We're already pretty aware of where our cognitive deficits are, and we can address them. But it's not super rocket science to figure that out as a new student. You take a problem, you look at what you did wrong, and you come up with a hypothesis and a way of ameliorating it, right? Okay, I had this thing happen, and it was a visual problem, and what I did was X, and what I should have done is Y. And it's like, great, upgrading X to Y for your flow chart of how you do this stuff. I mean, that's what learning is. That's what improving performance is.
It's partially about what the level of the analysis is, because the student will often say, oh, the problem is I suck at visual stuff, as opposed to they'll just look at the content and say, oh, the problem is I'm bad at visual stuff.
Not just the student, apparently.
And and look, if you can work on the underlying deficit, if I can get better at visualizing things or whatever, or finding efficient workarounds, that's obviously really good. But I'm approaching it at a slightly different level. Like, what does it mean that I'm not so good at this, and how am I going to deal with that as a test taker? Because the students or the parents' responses is almost inevitably a subject matter response. And
I get that a lot. Even with parents where I've been just really clear, look, we'll get better results if we put our eye on a different ball here.
Right.
For sure. Okay, so it's a geometry problem. I suck at geometry. Not as helpful as okay, I made these 3 decisions, and decision number 2 is kind of where it went off the rails. So let's wind this back. Let me have you, Pete, if you would please repeat the feedback you gave us, but give it in that nice, concise, like could fit it on a Post-it. Here's what I did before. Here's what I'm going to do in future, so that Michael and I can see, he's become a better test taker, at least for this test, if not.
What I did before was I immediately reacted to the type of problem it was before I really had any chance to evaluate the specifics of that problem. And what I should learn to do differently is assuming I should have assumed that it was within my skill set until proven otherwise. And as I say, the AMC makes that easier because they give you question number hints as to difficulty.
Okay, so I'm hearing a couple different things there.
Had you given us that hint, by the way, Wes? I don't recall. Had you told us what number?
I think you guys both indicated.
You guys both indicated to me that this was not a super hard problem. You didn't actually tell me question number, but you effectively gave me that information.
Yes and no. I mean, there's hard and there's hard, right? What we indicated is that there was a method that wasn't especially labor intensive to solve it, but the sense in which the AMC gives us the questions in order of difficulty is that it gives us the questions in order of your likelihood of getting it right, not in order of how hard will it seem to the person who does get it right. And so I don't recall how hard that question was.
I will simply say, as I was sitting here, I was aware that this was not because you guys both have a decent sense of where my skills lie, and clearly you communicated to me one way or another this was not beyond what I can do, even given my limitations.
Okay. So let's start with the recognition that you, Pete, who've been doing this for a darn long time and thinking hard about it for a long time and are a good thinker, okay, you recognized this problem is likely to be inside my skill set for difficulty. And yet, the voice in your head caused you to run a semi-automatic program, in some sense, that led you to not answer the question correctly. I would say that this is a great example of the test author throwing you off your game. Now, with cooperation from you, of course, but at the end of the day, right? Like one of the best ways to get a problem to go unanswered by a student is to make it look impossible so that they turn away from it before they've had a chance to evaluate it. Now we're into Daniel Kahneman's type 1 and type 2 thinking, the idea of which is, I can glance at that and know how difficult it is. And it's like, no, that's the lesson. You can't. Right? You, Pete, can, but even though you didn't listen to the voice that said this is easier, not because you're a bad guy, but because you're a human. And like we have that built in and we have to overcome that automatic program if we're to really reach our potential here. We have to transcend that voice that says, and we have to sit with the discomfort for a minute or two and really look at it.
Let me ask you both about that. I'm sure you've had this experience that with a student, I'll give you a sort of a paradigm case. He discovers, I didn't do that one page. Like I got stuck together, or there was a problem at the bottom of the page, and
as a consequence, I went from question 4 to question 17 or whatever, that kind of thing,
or whatever it is. Yeah. And so if I've had this experience where I'll tell the student, go ahead. We're going to look at everything you've done, but then we're going to carve out a little while and answer those questions for me right now. Almost without exception, those questions where there's someone, so to speak, looking over your shoulder, the students do worse at those. So it's not, and so I'll just project this onto Pete. It's not only here's a question of a sort that it's not my strength apparently, right? But also, there are 2 people looking at me while I'm trying to solve this one problem. They're not like waiting for me to get through a page of 10 where I can pick and choose, and it'll even out over time. So I know I would feel like if you asked me a question that was that where I was just missing it, and you and Peter waiting for me to finish, I'm going to have I think some bad habits are going to emerge, right? So
It's
That's
funny because
interesting.
if it were just Wes and I having this conversation, I feel less that way. But you,
yeah.
who of course I am totally not competing with in any way, shape, or form.
But it's hard not to. Yeah.
I know. I'm kidding,
Yeah,
of
yeah, I know.
course.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the fact that you had gotten it previously and didn't seem that challenging probably did have an effect. It's funny because
Yeah.
when I'm tutoring, I make a whether I'm in person or on Zoom or what have you, I really make it clear that I am not looking over their shoulders as they're doing the problem for
Right.
precisely that reason. Like
Yeah.
I am,
Yeah.
it's funny because I once had a parent, I was in person and they were like, they were a little upset because they were like, you seemed like you were on your phone while the student was doing a problem. And I probably was, but I was like, that's not, no, but I was like, that's on purpose, because if you have someone just intently looking over your shoulder as you're doing a problem, that's really detrimental. And maybe I should have been doing something less obviously, like, I should have done some other thing like stared at the ceiling or writing little notes in my book about, poetry I'm going to write or whatever. I don't know what. But the idea that I'm not looking at the kid is purely intentional.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of glance over on occasion because I want to see how they're doing and I want to see, if they're really on the wrong track or should I step in. So I kind of peek over now and again, but I do not want to be intently looking at them.
Right. What I'll often do, since this is all done via Zoom now for me, is I will ask them to keep their camera and microphone on so that I can hear and see them, and I'll turn mine off, and just let them know, I'm not in the room anymore, but but the second you make a noise, I am,
right.
I'll rejoin you. So
I like that, but I have the opposite response. Well, is it really opposite? I certainly get the value of like giving a person, right, student or otherwise, right, give a person some space to do their thing their way. Sure, 100%. A pretty common move during coaching sessions for me is to ask them to narrate their thought process as they do the thing.
Yeah.
And I'm staring at them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it depends on the on what the object of the exercise is. I was thinking of a circumstance where I'm trying to get something scored. Right. I want a number on this date so we can get a sense of a trajectory. Right. So in that circumstance, I'm not going to be like that.
Okay. That makes sense when I'm playing in some sense test proctor.
I do some of each, actually. I do sometimes I want the student to narrate in real time. I would say more commonly I will wait till the moment they're done while it's still fresh and they can still give me some sort of an accurate answer and then ask me to narrate the last 2 minutes for me.
Yeah.
As opposed to in real time. Like, because if you ask a kid, what did you do yesterday? They have no idea, nor would I. But if you ask them, what did you do 2 minutes ago? They can narrate it pretty well at that point.
The other thing is, if you give one of us a problem that's kind of that we have like a 70% chance of getting right, and a map of our path through that problem is probably actually going to be a bit of a mess, and we'll clean it up and give the nice neat account of it, but without the without
the false starts and
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's more true also on AMC problems than say SAT problems because they're harder.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're more likely to do something, and we've talked about this before in terms of struggling skills, doing something that's mathematically valid but ultimately unhelpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you ask someone to talk it through, I'm not saying that's not valuable. I'm just saying, well, here's where the value would lie if there were value. They're going to say, I'm going to draw a line here and cut this trapezoid into two triangles. And you're going to know, man, that is not going to work. But you're not going to say that. You're going to say, go ahead.
I might say, okay, good. taking an action makes sense to me. Taking a thoughtful action makes sense to me. What are the principles that guide this action?
Sure. And then they're going to say, well,
I don't have anything else to do, so I better draw something. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, that could be. It could also be, because a lot of good students behave this way, but probably couldn't articulate it. If I get an irregular figure, or even a regular-ish figure that's not, that's not familiar to me, I'm going to try to break it into figures with which I'm more familiar, right? So, I mean, I know how, I can sort of remember the formula for every trapezoid, but I'm not sure how to apply it here. But I know a lot about triangles, so I'll draw, I'll draw this diagonal and see what happens, right? So, and it'd be great if they said that last part out loud, actually, and see what happens. Right.
And see what happens is, those are powerful words. Like whenever a student starts off with, I don't know, let's see. It's like, okay, that's good. Right.
Yeah.
There's still a thing that's kind of itching in the back of my head here, though, which is that I have the preconception that it's powerful to just stare at a student and say, narrate your thought process while I stare at you. Not because it's good to get used to the idea that the proctor's going to stare at you, but to get you more used to the idea that you're going to be self-critical while you're doing this stuff, because you're going to be closer to the edge of your own uncertainty.
Yeah.
You're going to be watching yourself. So it's like, well, if you're going to be watching yourself, let's at least have a constructive model for it. Talk me through why you're doing what you're doing. Because if the answer is, I don't know, then we got to look at that. It's automatic. Well, it's like, automatic got you to where you are. It's not going to get you to where you want to get to.
Yeah.
We're going to have to be deliberate about this.
Yeah. And possibly your greater use of that tool, because Pete and I both use it, but it sounds as if you use it more.
I think
has to do, maybe that's just something about you. It might also be that you spend so much time with competition math, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking that it's not so much a me thing as an AMC versus SAT or ACT thing, right? Because as like surprising no one I trust, right? For most of the folks that we coach, the hard part on the SAT or the ACT isn't how am I going to do, double the number of hard problems. It's really how am I going to reduce the number of unforced errors.
Yes, that is absolutely what my job is when I'm doing SAT and ACT stuff.
Right.
And GMAT stuff. I just had a GMAT student this morning, and we spent an hour and a half doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like on the GMAT, unforced errors are on the SAT and the ACT. I feel like unforced errors are largely invited by endurance issues. Like it's 3.5 or whatever it is hours of just like, oh my God, when is this going to be over? Whereas the GMAT, like it requires more engagement in the first place. But I feel like there's even more detail to keep track of. And so the unforced errors are in some sense more honest. I don't know if that's fair. Michael, you know the GMAT better than I do. Like, am I just completely making this up, or am I missing kind of a thread?
The unforced errors, I'd have to think more about it. I mean, the question adaptive nature of the GMAT is going to people are going to make more errors, right? Even very, very high performing students are going to make more errors. The question is whether those errors will in fact be unforced. I would say, certainly, like if you're looking at the sentence correction, they're almost, for a lot of students, almost all the mistakes they make in sentence correction are unforced. And they're a result of doing the thing that's usually a good idea, but not a good idea right now. So Pete, I have a question for you. I know you do LSAT work, and in fact, you mentioned in passing that you think more of your approach to the LSAT than you think of anybody else's approach to the LSAT, which is appropriate. It's just different. It's just different. Yeah, but here's my question for you: the logic game section or analytical reasoning section is super visual. So, given that you describe yourself as not a visual person, how is it you're expert at that section?
It's interesting you ask that, because first thing is I do them visually. You have to, and I don't agree with the recent changes they've made. For those who don't know, they're eliminating the game section from the LSAT because someone who was visually impaired said basically, this is not fair for me. I can't do this. And that person is right. Just to be perfectly clear, that person is 100% right. My solution would have been, okay, if you can really demonstrate a substantial visual impairment, then you're exempt from it, as opposed to we're removing the entire section from the test. My remedy would have been different, but
side note,
yes,
is whatever visual whatever the logic games relied on. Are we saying that law school and the job of lawyering does not rely on those skills?
That's right. It does not rely on those skills at all. Yeah.
Oh, I see. All right. So it's not like you're not kicking the can farther.
No.
No. It's a legit argument. My remedy would have been to because I think it is a very valuable section. My remedy would have been simply to have a waiver for people who can demonstrate a certain level of visual impairment and keep the game section sensible. As opposed to remove the whole thing. But that's neither here nor there. The answer is that, first of all, obviously I do them visually. And it's not – the answer is my particular limitation is something like take a cube and slice it, not I'm going to draw little boxes and little bars and arrows and this and that. Sure. So the place where my limitation lies doesn't really affect the LSAT games.
Oh, that's interesting. So you can – and I'm going to make a prediction here. When you took econ, supposing you did.
I did. I was an econ major.
Okay. You had no trouble whatsoever using a visual model for relationship between supply and demand.
Correct. Using a supply-demand grid, just a basic graph, and you draw a Phillips curve and all that stuff. That's all fine.
Right.
That's all fine.
So what you identify as your kind of problem with geometry.
I would call it spatial. It's three-dimensional stuff. It's rotate a cube in space, and I'm just like, oh gosh. So that's where my limitation specifically lies. And the answer is I don't want to make this a whole LSAT games disquisition, but the short answer is I use what I actually call it the math of the games, which simply means you've got 5 spots and you've got 7 people. So you have to think about crowding people out, as opposed to the predominant method, which is here are the 14 types of LSAT games, and we're going to talk about each of the 14 types. And I'm just like, I'm sure they're right when they identify the 14 types of LSAT games, but I do not fundamentally think that's the right approach to it.
Yeah. I won't go. I got a lot to say about that, but let's not get into it.
Well, but I would cast this discussion as an aspect of the very thing I'm advocating for in AMC students and their parents, which is know thyself. Be helpful if you use Latin for that.
Yeah, I will say something about them because I think it does connect up. They're the main national, the big LSAT prep companies. They take advantage of the fact that they lean into the fact that people going to law school are real work enthusiasts, or they better be anyway. And so when Manhattan tried to compete with those people by saying, "Look, we're going to teach you how to improve your thinking." And we'll have not quite half as many hours in a class. All the people looking at it like, that's not as many calories per dollar, is it? So it wasn't a success in spite of the fact that the Manhattan LSAT program was actually quite good.
Just to be clear, this is because I've been bi-coastal for a while. When I was more in New York, I totally had this problem in New York. It's because they would just say, you can't get done with SAT prep in 9 1.5-hour sessions. Like, you can't. And it's like, but I do. And
no. Yeah, the response is, you can't. Sure.
Well, and because the predominant mode of test prep in New York is we are going to do all the tests. We are going to do it every week for 6 months or a year or whatever, and we're just going to brute force this. And it's funny because you. Go ahead.
So the interesting thing about that, right? So Michael and I were in an SAT prep company for some years together, and for a while we struggled with this idea of like, how are we going to combat the notion that more is better, right? Better is better. It's like, well, no, more is better, because the same thing is happening on the SAT side. It's just more on the LSAT side. And what we finally came down to was recognizing that while people are accounting for the amount of time it takes to do it, the amount of money it costs to do it, one of the other currencies in play is student enthusiasm. Right? Like students are willing, they're game to like put a certain amount of effort in, and some of them are willing to put a lot of effort in, but it's always finite. And once it's done, it's never coming back. You know, it's
yes.
Yeah. It's like, I can't look at another SAT. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I'm sure we've all had students who are already burnt out on some kind of 200-hour program. And
when they come to us. Yeah.
When they come to us, and it's like, it doesn't usually work out that well. I mean, usually the conversation with the parent is, you know, little Johnny doesn't want to do the LSAT, and I think little Johnny might have a point. You know?
Yeah.
So, or, SAT, I might say. Yeah.
So when it comes to the AMC, well, when it comes to any of these tests, right, there's an art in aligning knowledge level, excitement level, right, enthusiasm level, and the money and time curve. Like, get them all to focus on a single point. Preferably which point is test day, right? And it's hard. Like, you really have to know what you're doing to get these things to line up. One of the things that I've been really advocating for years is the notion that if you come at this thing like it's the LSAT, not only is it not going to work well, because this test it's not for work enthusiasts. This is a test for energetic, creative people. And if you work yourself to the point that you no longer are feeling energetic and creative, you're not going to do as well as you might otherwise. The end. But also because, like, if you're going to do the thing where you simply exhaust the practice material and know all the stuff, it has to become your varsity sport for a year and a half. It has to be the thing you do when you're not in school, because there's just a ton of it. And it's like, that's, again, you're going to spend down that proportion of your high school career on a second best way of preparation. Like, that only makes sense if plan A doesn't work for you. If being creative and being high energy and learning quickly doesn't work for you. And I'm here to tell you, Jack, if that's not your style, this is the wrong test for you.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You know, but that gets us back.
It's not mandatory for anybody.
No, certainly not. But that gets us back to what we were talking about before, which is, okay, so if you're going to do this thing so quickly and so creatively and so energetically, like, how are you going to be successful? And the answer is that you're going to analyze your mistakes to within an inch of their lives, right? So when I make this mistake, I'm going to distill out the lesson, and then I'm going to try the proposed solution tomorrow. And if it works, I'm etching it into a stone tablet. And if it doesn't work, I'm writing it off, throwing it away, and trying again. Like, this, it's not hard because the math is hard. It's hard because you have to do this very pointedly effective, emotionally difficult process.
Which is why, you know, students will sometimes, in a very well-intentioned way, let's say with an ACT test where the tests are all available online, I'll give them the test and they'll grade it themselves, which is fine. I don't care. But then they'll say, I've gone over the test, and I'm like, you've looked at which question, right? Exactly. You looked at which questions you missed, and you may have covered like a math error, but you have not, I can almost guarantee you, distilled from it the lessons that I would distill by going over those same questions with you. Because my analysis is going to be of a different type than yours is, and that's where my value is. That's why I have a job.
And that's I usually push back on the on review or go over, not because I think it's a bad word, but because students too often use it to indicate, I'm going to read the answers and I'm going to read some solutions and I'm going to trust that something
kind of nod my head a little bit. And
something good is leaking in through my ear. And it's like, no, that's not how it goes. Whatever verb they use, I ask for a different verb just to help underscore the idea that, no, this analysis is different from what you are used to doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what are some predictions that you have about some of the common pitfalls you're going to find students making as they approach this test for the first time? Let's just set up a typical student. A typical student is going to be a sophomore taking pre-calculus, getting an A, preparing for the AMC 12, who has taken the AMC 10 in the past?
Well, the first thing that would occur to me is that there's going to be a psychological problem when that student can't get everything right and have 6 minutes left over at the end, as he has or she has on every other apparently similar test that he or she has ever taken.
Apparently similar is a good phrase, yeah.
The second thing I would say is that there's going to be a serious misallocation. Their perception of how they should be spending their time is substantially different from what I'm going to want, meaning they're going to try to make it so that either they can finish the test, or their assumption is going to be, I should be able to finish this, and mine isn't. Mine assumption is going to be that they should be concentrating on substantially fewer questions than the 25, and we're going to need to get some alignment on that, because they're going to be substantially off on that set of assumptions about time and completion.
That's right. They're going to say, well, 25 questions, 75 minutes, that's 3 minutes per question. And it's like, okay, that's wrong in so many ways. One of which is you're never going to...
Right. Even assuming they had the curve right, they're still going to be wrong, because let's assume they even, of course that's right, but even assuming they understood the curve perfectly, they're still going to be off, because they're going to base it on what is a finishing pace. What is the pace I should go at, assuming I'm going to answer 25 questions in 75 minutes? And that initial assumption is very probably wrong.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So the initial goal on an AMC 12 should be to get the first 10 questions right. We're going to build to the point where you're getting the first 15 questions right. We are not going to worry about getting the first 20 questions right unless and until we've established that you might be a candidate for 2 levels beyond the USA Math Olympiad. Because in that circumstance, getting a truly exemplary AMC 12 score is going to boost your chances. But we are much, much more interested in the long-term plan of reliably getting the first 15, maybe 16 questions right than confronting, like I routinely say, like, question 25 is there for 2 kinds of people. The people who can do them, and I can count them on 2 hands, and the people who don't know any better.
Well, it's like the joke I make. I'll ask a student on the SAT, the student scoring 660 on the math, and I'll say, would you rather have whatever score you're going to get, or the score of the first person who finishes every section? And you would rather have your score, because it's possible that person
that's good.
Yeah.
Come on, wait, let's just sit on that for a minute. That's good. All right, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's exactly the same thing you're describing, because it's possible that person is this great. I'm sorry. It's possible this person is this great genius who finished super early and got everything right, but far more likely they don't know squat about squat, the person who finished first.
Just this, the psychological issue of, okay, how do I pace this? What are my expectations? Is difficult, particularly if you are, I'll say it this way, if you are optimized for squeezing the last point out of a timed test by rushing through it, that's going to really be a disadvantage on this test. And you may think, well, I'll just downshift into another thing, but it's like, if you are a Formula One race car driver, that does not automatically make you better at going 55 miles an hour down a normal highway. And in fact, it may be dangerous in some ways.
Well, the other aspect of this is that the assumption is, well, I'll finish early and then I'll go back and double check my work. And I'm like, for whatever hardwired reason in humans, very much good luck with that. If you add 4 and 5 and get 11 and you double check your work, I would say your odds of finding that error are 5 or 10% maybe. I mean, if you make some gross obvious error.
So there are a few things that I advocate for AMC students to combat that. So first, yes, I agree with you 100%. Here's some things that help to combat those terrible, terrible odds. First off, as you rightly point out, is you can simply do your work in such a way that you don't expect to take a second pass. Like, that's a legit strategy. It works better for some people than others, but that's something to consider. If you are going to take a second pass, you should not be double checking your work. You should not be retreading what you're doing. What you should be doing is rereading the question and asking, is the question I'm reading the same one I remember answering? Because misreading the question is going to be a common source of errors. Another one is to reread the question and say, given what I currently understand about this problem, is my answer plausible? Not correct, but plausible. Does it seem, I don't know. Okay, great. But sometimes it's going to be like, wait, that just doesn't seem right.
Right. The
Okay,
area
now
of this
you know what you're
triangle is
looking
not
for.
-6. Yes, the area of the triangle is not -6.
Exactly, right? It's like, yeah, totally. Or even I'm looking at the coordinates of the triangle and it looks too big for that. Like it can't be 6. It's got to be a 2-digit number or something, whatever it is. Right. So that's another one for sure. The other one is don't do mental math. Not because mental math is bad, although it usually is, but because mental math can't be checked, whereas physical math can. You can enter the space of, okay, did the person who wrote this down write the right things? And then finally, there's that time-honored trick of, given that somebody in the room got this one wrong, what's the thing they did wrong? Because what did I do wrong is a different pathway from what did some poor schmo in the room with me do wrong. And if you can depersonalize it to that degree, you can get around some of the cognitive biases that motivate you to not see an error.
Yeah. Oh no, there's a lot of clever stuff there that I'm gonna have to go back and relook at this and take some notes myself, because that was some. The other thing I think honestly is, I mean, all the things you're saying are true and were very insightful. Is that we sort of, I think almost inevitably, carve some temporary neural pathway of what did I do last time, and it's very difficult to get yourself out of that little rut.
Oh, so true. God, that's so true. It's like it's what's the there's some adage about you can't step in the same river twice, and yet when it comes to these problems, like you step in the problem, and now it's frozen in time for you. You can't ever see it any other way.
Right, and I think that's fairly difficult to combat, because it's funny. I'm very much. I mean, I really like some of your suggestions for how to relook at a problem. My general belief is, I don't have kids relooking at problems. I mean,
I think I'm probably bringing the error. I'm probably bringing the success rate from 5 or 10% up to somewhere between 30 and 60%. And I'll take
good.
it.
No, that's great. Oh my gosh.
You catch half the errors that you made. That's great. Yeah, for sure.
If you can do that, I don't know how that sounds to other people listening. If you can do that, that is amazing and awesome.
It's like, and it's a big deal, but talking about setting expectations, right? The expectation most students have is, well, if I'm careful about it, I should catch all my errors. Maybe I'll miss one. And it's just like, no, that's not a thing.
That's not a thing.
There's just too much on the line against you.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So let's continue listing things that you think are going to come up as you encounter people who are not unfamiliar with this test, but maybe unfamiliar with, the very best practices.
I think there's going to be an over tendency to brute force things.
Ooh, let's talk about that one. Go ahead.
Well, one of the basic questions always is, because of course brute force is not a bad thing, is you've got some problem that involves combinatorics somehow, and you're going to have to enumerate all the possible ways that you could list the 5 people running for student council or what have you.
Sure.
And the question is, if you just look at the problem without doing any math and you estimate, what do I think, just by intuition, how many ways are there of doing it? Above this number, you can't really write them out. But below this number, just write them all out.
Yes.
And to take some, so basically the students are going to be actually both too willing and not willing enough to brute force things. They're too willing to brute force, I'm going to add up all the powers of 3 up to 3 to the 10th. It's like, do not do this.
Right.
Versus there are 10 ways of arranging the people running for student council. Actually list all 10 of those. That would be great.
So I want to speak to this, but first let me just point out, Michael, you're using the internal microphone on your computer according to my little display panel rather than using the microphone that's near to your face. And if you can swap that out, that would probably be better.
Might just be a... Okay, sorry about that. I'll see if I can fix that. Yeah,
that sounds good. So I want to suggest that the magic number on the AMC, at least for people starting out, is 30. If
Oh,
it's
wow.
30 or fewer things, you should be brute forcing. If it's more than 30, you should not be brute forcing. Okay. And it's obviously like, is that a hard and fast rule? No. The reason I say 30 is that some students genuinely believe that above 8 or 10, they should be using an elegant solution. And that's not true. Relatively few go the other direction, but some of them do. Well, it's only 60 things, I'll write them out. It's like, that's not the intention here. But most students I find think that the limit's around 10 or 15 when in fact it's around 30. Okay. Oh, I've got some sequence, whatever. I'm going to write some out and look for the pattern. It's like, yeah, write them out. Like that pattern might not happen in the first 5 terms. Write out 30 terms and then let's see where you are. Unless you get to 8 and you see what you're looking for. Okay, that's, that's fine too. But wait, I got a really clever way to do this. Nope, I don't want to see the clever way to do this. I want to see the way that you're going to do this. That's
well, and I will
that gets you
literally,
to where you need to get.
I will actually, let's say there are, 10 or 20 ways to do it, I'll ask them before they start, how long do you think it'll take you to write these out?
Right.
And then I will time them. I'm like, okay, write them out now. And inevitably, it
Right.
takes them less time than they think it would to enumerate them.
Oh yeah, this is going to take a minute or two. It's like, no, 17 seconds. Like
Right,
that's not a
right.
minute or two.
Right.
Yeah.
And it matters, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And here we're getting into something else, which is, it's going to sound like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth here, but we're not. Time absolutely matters on this test, but not in the sense that you should be rushing.
Right.
It matters in the sense that you should be efficient.
I can hear the echo. I think that's why you said I should change.
No. The reason I said you should change is that I can see it says internal microphone on you and external microphone on you.
I can't change it while it's recording. So if you want to, pause the recording.
No, we're
okay.
fine.
Okay.
Your voice is still beautiful, just not as beautiful as it might otherwise be. No, you're good. So go on.
This guy in the other room is an FM radio guy. Actually, I could try to adopt my dad's voice. Yeah, so
it's perfect.
His old KBOO voice.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Can I use my broadcaster voice at some point?
Rounder.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's have the broadcaster
please,
voice. That'll be part of the fun.
Yeah.
Live from Palmer Stadium in Princeton, New Jersey, this is Princeton Tiger football. Oh, yeah. I can go through the whole thing. I remember the sponsors and everything. Oh, I was the lead broadcaster for football and basketball.
Please no. Oh, God, you're killing me. Very good. So let's continue to enumerate, right? What are some of the other things that people are going to come up against? Because I think that this is, and let me unpack, now that we're kind of into it, let me unpack one of the reasons that I'm saying this. I have found that my most successful AMC students have the most interesting observations about their own performance. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, with a student who is going to be less successful, I make the suggestions. Well, I think this is what you did, and this is what I think you should do differently. Oh, okay, Wes, I'll give that a try. And that's fine, that works. My more successful students, I have an idea in mind of what we're going to do, and they say, well, I think I should do X. And my reaction is, oh, yeah, that's better than what I was going to say. You should do that. Especially if they're learning the process over time, because then they're getting an even more valuable skill as they go. So
let me ask you if this is a problem, rather than guess that it is a problem.
All right.
So Wes and I have talked before that about this. I look at the AMC 10 and 12, and it looks like it's a real opportunity to have fun and be creative. But it's a competition as well. And so my concern is, competition has its place, right? I do a sport that's inherently competitive. You can't do it without competing, really. But it's also kind of death for learning in some ways, right? And
you talk about the martial art you practice.
Yeah, wrestling, jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
It's hard to do without at least formally competing against someone, right?
Okay.
So but if you're trying to teach someone to read poetry carefully, it's kind of a detriment that there's that if they get a good grade on the test, they might be able to take AP next semester.
I don't know. I don't yet get. Can you unpack that a little for me? I think I just kind of.
As soon as the student becomes concerned about making a certain mark, 90%, 96%, or about achieving a certain percentile score, I find even worse. That student has separated herself from the whole reason we're doing it in the first place. I hope, right?
Right. I see.
And so I guess I must have expressed this concern even more coherently a few months ago because you had a response to it then. And the response was, well, a lot of AMC students are, they're actually doing it for the joy of the thing. And it's not necessarily about getting a high enough score to do better than your big brother did 2 years ago, or to qualify for for the next level above the AMC, or whatever it is.
Right.
And so I do, because it's so easy to fall into the idea that the metric is the thing, and the ranking is the thing. And the AMC seems like such a great opportunity to for the math to be the thing and the problem solving to be the thing. I wonder if you have to lead students to take some joy in it.
Well, and look, I'm not naive. I understand, I'm being hired when I do SAT stuff, and I presume for AMC stuff as well, is to produce an outcome. We want an SAT, and I that's fine. I'm totally fine and happy with that. My highest aspiration for something like AMC, which may not be what really happens very often, is that I could help a student see beauty in math the way I sometimes do. I mean, I literally, it hasn't happened in a couple of years, but it's happened where I will do something mathematically and literally start to cry because I can see the beauty in what has just happened. And that's a pretty extreme thing, I understand. But that to me is the highest aspiration of what we could possibly do with this.
And I think I've mentioned this before, but I'm not sure I've mentioned to you, Pete. My oldest daughter went to CMC, one of the Claremont schools. And she was a French and biology major. Now, the French was kind of cheating because she's a native French speaker, but what are you going to do? But the class, she said before, the very best class that she had in her entire undergraduate career was a class I think she had as a sophomore. She had finished all the math requirements for the biology major, and so she took a class that was called something like Topics in Math, and it was just 2 weeks each on 8 different things, or 4 weeks each on 4 different things. And in other words, as far as the kind of breadth of content goes, it was kind of like the AMC, right?
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So here's some number theory, right? And we know you had that week and a half of discrete math in Algebra 2, but here's some, here's what's really going on, I mean, it was just a great class for her. She had, she enjoyed it so much that, if she hadn't been planning to go to med school, she might have changed her major to math. Right. It was a little late in the day to do that. So I think, there's certainly the opportunity to have the experience Pete's described, or the experience my daughter has had, and the experience that I've had too, although never in a math class, oddly enough, or almost never in a math class, but usually, encountering math somewhere else, so.
I know, it's nice. All right. So we'll see what we get. I feel like this has been a really good conversation because it's leaned into our expertise as coaches rather than trying to lean into our expertise as AMC coaches. Because all the things that we're talking about here are important for SAT prep. I would argue that they're at least as important, maybe even far more important for AMC prep. And again, it's a thing that all three of us are used to doing, which is looking at what a student has done and try to figure out, okay, what about that was good? What about that needs to change? And how do we get it to change? And of course, that starts with the student recognizing what's happened. And what we've all demonstrated during this gathering is how we use that power and turn it inward on ourselves. And I'm hoping that there are some people who will watch clips of this and get a model for how to do that themselves so that they can review their own AMC, SAT, LSAT, GRE, SSAT, whatever, geometry class, test, problem, and really think about, okay, what did I do here? What caused me to do those things? Which parts of these things are good and which parts would I prefer to change? Go ahead, Pete.
I'm just going to add one thing to it, which is there tends to be, from the student's point of view, some sense of blame, like, gosh, I suck at this, whatever, that I think is really unfair to the student. Like, look, I'm pretty good at this stuff. And yet I've got weaknesses. I've got holes. I've got cognitive biases. I have all these things we've discussed today. These are not character flaws. These are things that impede you from getting the best score you might on some standardized test. It doesn't mean something about who you are as a person or your worth or whether you're a screw up or whatever the other thing the student goes to next. Like part of the reason we're able to have this conversation pretty honestly and directly is because I think we're all pretty confident in our own skill set. So that makes it easy actually to say, oh, here's what I'm not good at.
Well, that's nice to say, but I also hasten to point out, we're three relatively old people, right? Certainly relative to our students. Okay.
Sure.
And it's kind of a distant memory to us to have a lot of our identity invested in being the smart kid or the smart guy.
Yeah, but I was on the school board, and as part of the training we were obliged to do, it was valuable. For most of these things, I tried to avoid it. This was some training on identity that had implications for, race and ethnicity. But we were asked to write down the three features that we thought were sort of really defined us, really constituted us. And smart was the first thing I thought. I mean, it's obnoxious to say, but the first thing I thought of was smart, and or smart / reflective. Something in that ballpark. Not just processing speed. And I'm sure the same thing is true of Pete, not least because for recreation, he uses his processing speed, and for the supplemental income, he uses his processing speed, right? So I mean, it's always there, right? So I don't think I'm sure none of us sort of valorizes it the way we would have when we were the smart 16-year-old, right? I remember asking my little sister, like, you have some dumb friends. Why is that, right? And her response was like, well, why is that the important thing to look for in a friend? And I'm like, yeah, that's a smart question, but I don't think it deserves an answer because, obviously what's important about a person is how smart they are. This is, I was very young at the time, right? So I don't know. In other words, I don't know if we're as far from that as all that. And I know that if the next time we do a group of 10 problems, I whiff 10 times, I'm going to feel that sting, So however full an idea I have of what's important in a person. So,
well, in that case, let me make this proposal for next time. I propose that next time I'm going to coach the two of you as I would coach students. We'll do some problems, and then we'll do some analysis that mirrors the kind of analysis we would do if I were the coach and you were the student. It'll probably be, we'll probably be able to shorthand some of it, but I'll try and slow it down to mask some of the expertise when you predict what I'm going to do. So that people can really understand, kind of unpack, okay, what does this really mean, and how are we going to do this next time? And maybe try to demystify some of those pieces, and I'll trust it will be illuminating and not boring, even given your many years of experience.
I'm sure. I also want to return to what Pete was saying. There's another aspect of that. I thought, when you said that you were essentially saying these things that a student might feel bad about lacking, they're not really
Yeah.
characterological, right? They're not really, well, but that's true also of the less obvious the less obvious issues, but equally significant issues that people bring to the test. If they're anxious, that's not necessarily characterological either. That's not an aspect of their character so much as sometimes um, uh, of their brain chemistry or their training or whatever it is. Now, you could say, well, hold on. I mean, why are you drawing a line between character and those things? But let's not. Let's not say that. But even if the kind of immediate obstacle to getting 3 more questions correct on the AMC is that has nothing to do with math, right? The though the student still shouldn't blame herself for that. Shouldn't blame herself for getting anxious. Shouldn't blame herself for panicking. Shouldn't blame her. Whatever it is, right? It's just more.
Oh.
It's just more stuff to work on.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, boy, file that under easy to say and hard to do.
Yeah.
Because we all have those. I'm like,
Yeah.
how hard can it possibly be to gather all the documents together and get everything ready for my taxes? And it's like, oh, I dread it. It's like, well, yeah, but,
Yeah.
just like all these things.
Yeah. How hard?
It's
impossible. That's how hard it is. Yeah.
Well, yeah. How hard can it be? It could be impossible.
Yeah.
It's just a hurdle. And if we treat it as a hurdle, then we have a hope of vaulting it. Go ahead, Pete.
Oh, I was going to say, it reminds me, you didn't exactly say it, of one of the worst sentences I can imagine. There is no good English sentence that begins with the 4 words, "Why don't you just?" If you start with that, there is no good end to that sentence at all.
No.
That's right. The word "just" is unjust in that context.
Yes.
I can think of some excellent sentences that start that way, but they all involve profanity pretty quickly. So
You have wronged me.
Yeah.
Why don't you just?
And the horse you rode in on. Yeah.
And the horse you rode in on. Yes, exactly. Well, gentlemen, this has been illuminating for me, at least. I hope for some other folks too.
It's been great.
Just
as always.
Thank you very kindly, and I right back at you. I will look forward to bringing some problems next time, so we can get into the meat of the matter, as it were, and see if we can do some of that coaching that I promised. But thank you for making the time. I really appreciate it, Pete Baum and Michael Schwartz.